The standard American diet is a plant-based diet. I mean, most people don't realize that. 70% of the calories come from plants on a standard American diet. When we look at the American diet, the average American eats about 2 ounces of beef a day. That's tiny. 2 ounces is nothing. It's like 5% of our diet. And we're blaming all these issues on beef. Now,
how did you discover the carnivore diet? You mentioned that you heard there was like a group that was practicing.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds crazy and people dismiss it. I mean, I was just on social media looking. I was just kind of, you get into this stuff. Everybody's sort of built into social media now. It's weaved into our lives now. We're kind of irrevocably, for good or bad, it's the way communication goes on. And so, I just started reading and observing people and, seeing these people. They called it zero carb at this time. There was a group called Zeroing In on Health. And I started, talking, interacting with those, asking them questions. And, that's how I started on this. And, it's been a lot of fun. It's obviously ruffled a lot of feathers. And I know Paul and I know Michaela. I've talked with those guys. In fact, I just had a little podcast with Paul the other day. And Paul and I, we have a little bit of differences, but we generally agree. And I've had dinner with Michaela a couple times, and so they're good folks. Their heart is in the right place, and we're not out here to kill all the cows or harm animals. We're just out here to try to help people that are having problems, and hopefully we're doing a good job.
Of course, I absolutely get the sense of that from you guys. And as somebody who is, I am definitely a strong advocate for the consumption of animal products. I also advocate for the consumption of fruits and vegetables, but
it's crazy, isn't it? I'm not, I want to be. I don't think that fruits and vegetables are inherently bad. I don't. I just think some people tolerate them better than others, and I think you need to be objective about it. I don't think they're universally without problem. I think, there's all kinds of AIP protocols and FODMAP stuff. We see people that don't tolerate certain foods, whether it's animals or fruit, vegetables, wheat, grain, whatever you want to say. But I think to say that just eat as many fruits and vegetables as possible and everything's going to be great, I think that's a little bit misleading. I think there certainly can be balance. I know I heard you talk about you see a study about visual processing speed going up when you consume, was it polyphenols, I think. So
certain carotenoids like
carotenoids,
lutein.
Okay. Well, let's just say that happened. Let's say, and this is a good topic because I think this is the way I would look at that. I would say, that's a drug-like effect. Potentially we'd say it's a drug-like effect. And there are many things that have drug-like effects, some good, some bad. We say nicotine, caffeine, alcohol, thousands of drugs we've derived from plant compounds. And this is another sort of thing. And then the question would be, so if my visual processing goes up and you say, well, that seems like a good thing, and it probably is. So what happens when you don't take the carotenoid anymore? So does your visual processing speed maybe slows down below baseline? So now you have to continue to take the carotenoids on a regular basis to have that effect. And so maybe is there a tolerance effect to that? Is that going on? We don't know. Does the effect wear off over time? Because this, I'm sure, was an acute study that was done. So what happens if we chronically expose? Does that effect go away with time? Are there side effects potentially? Who knows? This is all speculative stuff. It becomes very reductionist when you look at one pathway and say, okay, because when we look at compounds, you've got, enzymatic reactions, biochemical reactions. You add things in there, they either have no effect, they speed it up, or they slow it down. So you're going to say, what's going to happen? Is it good? Is it bad? What happens somewhere else remotely? Is it good? Is it bad? What's the net effect? We don't just consume carotenoids in isolation. Unless you go to a vitamin store and do that. But food has many, many things in there. So if we say, I'm going to eat some of the polyphenols in there, we say, well, polyphenols have good effect. Maybe they upregulate our defense systems, and that's a good thing. But then you say, well, what else do polyphenols do? Well, they inhibit the absorption of amino acids and fats. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I would argue it's maybe a bad thing. So it's kind of, one of those things that we're just kind of like, do we know? Do we not know? It's really hard. This is a hard thing. Nutrition is extremely hard. So I look at the big picture, and I'm really, some people say it's dumb, but I'm just like, you can argue about the little pathways and say, oh, that sounds really cool and groovy and great. Let's take a supplement. Maybe it'll help us. Maybe it does. Maybe I can objectively tell this. I don't know if you can tell if your visual processing speed got better or not. Maybe you can. Maybe you can't. I don't know. But, you can say that I had diabetes and now I don't. I had high blood pressure and now I don't. I was fat and now I'm lean. Those things I think are the big picture things. And then the other stuff, am I going to live an extra 6.7 months? I don't know. I just, and I think when people tell you that, I look a little bit, a little suspect when anybody says that. When guys like David Sinclair says, I can tell you within 6 months when you're going to die based on DNA, histones and methylation, acetylation, epigenetic modification. I'm like, I'm not sure.
Yeah. I think the question is, though, do the benefits outweigh the risks?
Right.
I mean, with every treatment, right,
Sure.
there are benefits, there are risks. So I guess you're arguing that the risks outweigh the benefits.
No, I'm arguing it depends. I'm arguing maybe for you it's a benefit. Maybe for somebody on a standard American diet, fiber is a net positive. Maybe fruits and vegetables are a net positive. For someone who has food sensitivities and reactions to spinach, oxalate problems perhaps, and are on a carnivore diet, probably a net negative. And I think it's just fair to say, let's test that. And, for some people, it's like meat may be a problem. Now, it's kind of interesting. I was lecturing in Malaysia a few months ago, and we had a speaker there from Cambridge, and he was talking about food sensitivity testing, immune reactions to different foods. And he had tested like 250,000 people for 20 plus years, every year, 250,000, something like 4 million people. The least reactive food that he ever tests ever is red meat. It's like that's like baseline human food. Eggs, dairy, shellfish, seafood, all kinds of plant compounds do tend to react to people. But red meat seems to be like that safe baseline food. And I think that's, when people ask me who is it appropriate for, I mean, outside of religious and financial and stuff, but I mean, human physiologically reasons, I think most people, particularly people that aren't really diseased, red meat's a pretty inert food. I mean, if your digestive system is messed up and you don't produce stomach acid and you've got all these problems, that becomes more problematic. But for most people, that's the baseline food. And the question is, what can you add to that? Can you add fruits and vegetables? Can you add grains? Can you add dairy? And I think that's an open question. So I think, for some people, I mean, obviously there's populations that eat a variety of food and they do well. And I mean, you can argue what's quality of life, what are we measuring, what's health. I think that's a little bit individual. Most of us would say absence of disease, absence of pain, good function. And if you got that, you're probably in the top 5% of people based on what we have today, looking around, just going outside.
Yeah. So what is your iteration of the carnivore diet look like, and where do you diverge in thinking from Paul Saladino? Because I've had him on the podcast before.
Yeah, I mean, Paul and I, Paul started the diet because of me, basically. I met him when he first did that. And we had this, discussion. He said, I really think we need to include a variety of different parts, organs. We need to, show that we're going to hit the RDA. And I'm like, Paul, I don't think that's necessary. I think he focuses more on theoretical concerns, and I've sort of always kind of looked at results and try to reverse engineer things. I'm saying, what are people that are doing that are successful, they're doing it a long period of time? Mm-hmm. And the common denominator is they're just eating a bunch of meat. Some of them eat organs, most of them don't. Some of them eat dairy, most of them don't. Some of them, are particular about fat to protein ratio. Some of them are, but all of them in common are just eating typically red meat. So I'm like, that seems to be the central part. Now, I would say, and Paul and I agree, and I just had him on, I think Paul's kind of backing away a little bit from this. Maybe he does it, when I'm around. But he basically says the same thing I do at this point. I think organs are obviously full of vitamins and minerals. I mean, there's probably no reason not to include them in the diet, particularly if you like them. If you don't like them, or if they provide no tangible benefit to you, then I don't think they're necessary. And I think there's people that have done this for 10, 15, 20 years that are testament to this. I mean, the belief that, we look at indigenous tribes and they eat the whole animal. And I think, I'd say, probably because they're starving. I mean, really, these indigenous tribes are pushed to the edges of society. They are subsistence, clearly. They eat everything they can. They even eat plants in a lot of cases, right? So if we're talking about they're only eating the most nutritious parts, I would say that probably doesn't represent a surplus situation. And I think that humans were largely in a surplus situation. It's one of the reasons we grew the big brain, because we had this abundance of energy. And I think we were killing big animals. We were killing mammoths and mastodons and oryx and whatever. A lot of animals, a lot of fat. They were not hard to come by. We were very effective at killing them. There's pretty good anthropologic evidence. It didn't take much besides a spear to kill these big animals. You think about it. I don't know if you've ever been to Africa. When you go down there, you go in a place like the Serengeti and you come up to elephants and they just kind of stare and look at you. They're like, what are you going to do? Because you're puny, right? And they don't have any natural predators once they're adults. I mean, lions can't take them. They might pick off a few babies. But an adult-grown elephant has no natural predators. Little humans are like, but then guess what? We pull out some spear technology or some projectile technology, and then it's like a different ballgame, particularly as we moved into Europe, Asia, and then North America, because those animals never saw it coming. They're like, oh, it's just another small animal. I'm just going to keep grazing. So we were killing these things very, very easily. We had access to plenty of meat. So the question then becomes, and I think we're looking for fat. I think that's why we go after viscera. That's why we go after brains. That's why we go after bone marrow, because protein is very easy to come by when you're eating animals. There's proteins everywhere. It's all the muscle meat. Much of the organs contain protein, but getting the fat is really the key, I think, because that's where the energy comes from. Protein structure, fat is your energy outside of carbohydrates. And so I think the sort of the belief is we went after the viscera, or wild animals go after the viscera. They're going for the fat, in my belief. They want fat because we don't have, we have essential fats, we have essential amino acids, we have vitamins and minerals. So that's what we need biochemically. We don't need phytonutrients, we don't need fiber. I know there's potential conditional benefits to that. But when it comes to what do humans absolutely require, again, it's amino acids, fats, minerals, and vitamins. So I think that is the difference there. I think we were seeking fat. That's why we cracked the marrow. Early on, we were scavenging. Animals that can scavenge, that can crack the marrow, like hyenas, they can break the bones with the jaws. The other ones don't have enough jaw power. So we, because we had that bit of a brain growing, we figured out we could smack a rock into it. And now we've got access to all this wonderful nutrient-dense fat and having continuous access to that. So it wasn't probably feast or famine until we took up agriculture, until we overhunted the mammoths, and then there's debate on what drove the megafaunal extinction. I think most people, there's people that will say it's all a giant comet that crashed 13,000 years ago in wherever, Greenland or wherever the heck they think it hit. I think that is maybe account for a small amount of it, but mostly, the extinctions that happened 50,000 years ago, 65,000 years ago, clearly pattern. As soon as man moved in, Homo sapien moved in, boom, within a couple thousand years, the big animals went away. And so we just overate our food supply. And now we've got to chase down lean animals. And where do you get fat on lean animals? What's inside? You're not killing mammoths anymore, which have fat in their periphery, in their tissue. And so I think that's where that comes from.
So so correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the chief difference is that Paul is advocating for a nose to tail approach, and you're just eating steak. You're just eating ribeyes. Well,
that's not what I just eat, but I say nose to tail is fine. I have no objection to people doing that. I don't believe it's absolutely essential. And I don't even know if he says that anymore, because he basically just told me this. He goes, "Oh, well, if it's working for you, fine. I'm not going to tell you to change." And there's enough people, and I've surveyed 10,000 people doing this diet, and about 15% regularly eat organ meat. The rest is very spotty to never. So we got and the vast majority of them come off their beds, lose weight, mood stabilizes. So we're seeing the effect regardless of whether they eat organs or not. Now, certainly there's some people that may be particularly depleted, maybe, not to pick on these folks, maybe ex-plant-based people or vegans that have very much depleted stuff. They may find that they recover quicker with organs, and maybe early on that makes sense. And then as time goes by, and we see this to people who have been in the community 10, 15 years, they'll say, people, they start out with eating all the organs, getting excited, and then 2 years in, they're like, I don't need that. So I think that's, Paul is very ambitious and a very bright guy, and he's got a lot of stuff going on, but I think he's in that really excited phase where I'm going to make everything count and biohack everything to make it perfect. And, I'm older. I'm kind of like, I don't want to deal with that stuff. I just want it to be simple. I think this is one of the problems we have. People stress and obsess about fitness and nutrition, and it's anxiety provoking, and it's you spend 3 hours a day thinking about what you're going to eat and calculating or just making it happen. And I'm like, I open the fridge and I say how many steaks I want, one or two. That's literally my decision making process when it comes down to nutrition. To be fair, I'll eat some eggs once in a while. I'll eat some fish once in a while. I'll go out to eat. I'll have a little bit of dairy here and there, and I don't freak out if they've got herb butter on my steak. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to die. There's a molecule of green thing. I don't care. I'm like, this is, and when I lecture about the carnivore diet, I say, what is it? And I said, look, the focus is on animal foods. This is where the money is. This is where the nutrition is. This is where you get your nutrition. The rest of the stuff, if you tolerate decoration, variety, spice, whatever, if you enjoy it, go for it. If it messes you up, be objective about it and say, maybe I shouldn't have it. Maybe I shouldn't eat that. Ghost pepper, sauce, because maybe that messes up my guts. Just be honest about this stuff and say, because honestly, when I was practicing as an orthopedic surgeon, and I've stepped away from that, I'm doing more nutrition stuff. But when I was practicing, I would get patients in there would tell me, hey doc, whenever I eat like gluten, my knee would hurt. And I'd look at them like, I'd look at their allergy list and see if they're wackos. I'd say, man, you're kind of weird. I just didn't believe that stuff because I was trained to, cut people open, throw knee replacements in them, prescribe them some drugs, and get out the door. Go work out, don't be so fat, and get stronger, right? I don't, not to say that I didn't care, but this is what we're taught, right? And when somebody's telling you, yeah, man, gluten hurts my knees, you're like, man, you don't fit the paradigm. Get out of my office. You do it in a polite way, but you're thinking that. Now, I see it all the time. And it's like, oh my gosh. And I found out with myself, when I went from a ketogenic diet, I had tendonitis in my right quadriceps for 10 years. I was squatting 500 pounds. And I felt like a little slight tear. I think I had a partial tear. And I had tendonitis. Could not get rid of it. I'd sit in a car for an hour and my knee would be hurting. I'd go to the gym, I'd squat. Invariably, I'd have knee pain afterwards. Carnivore diet, 2 months later, it went away. It's never come back. And that to me, that's not only shocking but fascinating. And we're seeing, there was just a paper came out the other day looking at synoviocytes, which are the cells that line the knee joint that produce the synovial fluid, which is the lubricant for our synovial joints, the knees, the shoulder, and some of the other joints. And we see that when insulin is really, really high, the synoviocytes put out inflammatory cytokines, a whole bunch of them. And it causes the process of irritation, inflammation, and osteoarthritis. And so it's like, maybe I shouldn't be hammering my insulin up all the time. And how do we do that? Frequent meals, a lot of carb-based meals. And so we shouldn't be snacking all the time. We see it all the time. We just see people that are just, killing themselves through their diet. And, the thing that I thought was unique, because a lot of people will say, well, it's all weight loss. It's just weight loss. I would see people that wouldn't lose anything. They might lose 3 or 4 pounds at most. Knee pain completely going away from changing diet. So it's clearly more than that. There's people that I see that are underweight. They maybe rheumatoid arthritis, maybe they're depressed, maybe they're anorexic. They've got all these health problems. And, they put on weight and they feel better. So again, it's not all down to just losing weight like a lot of people will say. So I think there's more to it.
Super interesting. So how do you're a public figure, you've got a big following at this point. How do you advocate then for this diet? Is it like a therapeutic diet, or is it something that you believe that everybody should be on?
No, I think it's something that I believe that people should be willing to try. I think, honestly, from a medical intervention perspective, I think it's very effective. I think rather than putting people on pills and procedures and other things like that, I think this is something a lot of people should try early on. I don't think it should be a last resort thing, because most people that have done this have done it as a last resort. I think you can use it as an elimination diet. I think clearly it works very quickly, solves problem very quickly. There are people that have spent 10 years trying to figure stuff out, going from nutritionist, trying diet to diet to diet to supplement, medication. They go on the diet and wow, 6 weeks later, everything went away. So I think it's something we should do early. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, give it 90 days and it doesn't work, fine, move on to something else. But I think it should be an early intervention for a lot of conditions, particularly things like autoimmune disease, also colitis, Crohn's disease, IBS, even mood disorders, depression and things like that. I think those things are really effective. And then for those that want to continue, that's fine. For those that want to sort of transition away, and we get a lot of people that are quote unquote carnivore adjacent or carnivore-ish or keto carnivore or meato. There's all kinds of names, right? They're just eating mostly meat, and they'll have some berries and they'll have an avocado and they'll have, whatever they want. And I think that's fine too. But I think, because we hear, obviously there's a huge, huge push to go plant-based, right? Save the world, save the planet, improve your health by going plant-based, right? And I'm very skeptical about that for a lot of reasons.
Me too.
But I think that, when we see that, the standard American diet is a plant-based diet. Most people don't realize that. 70% of the calories come from plants on a standard American diet. Now, granted, cheap refined carbohydrates, sugar, seed oils, all that crap, but this stuff is still plant-based. When we look at the American diet, the average American eats about 2 ounces of beef a day. That's tiny. 2 ounces is nothing. It's like 5% of our diet. And we're blaming all these issues on beef. Now there's more dairy in there. There's eggs. There's fish. Things like that. But when we actually look at red meat, it's a tiny, tiny sliver of the American diet. And we've got, 5 times as much sugar, seed oils, and refined grains are in there. So we're like, what's the culprit there? And interestingly, we see when people go on a whole food plant-based diet and they get better, they remove those same things. They get out the refined grains, the seed oils, and the sugar. When people go on a carnivore diet, they remove the same thing. And yet the vegans are maintaining, well, yeah, it's meat's bad. I'm like, no, it's probably the sugar, the seed oil, and the refined grains. And then the plants are fine if you can tolerate them. And that's kind of been my approach with this. But, they've got this sort of ideologic, let's save the animals type of thing. And then, we can go into the environmental stuff. And that's really, it's really a shame how we're scapegoating the animals. Now, clearly, agriculture in general has an environmental impact. There's no doubt about it. And clearly, when it comes to animal agriculture, we can continue to improve, and we have in large ways. We have, and we continue to do that. Should we just wipe it out completely and all eat soybean burgers to save the planet? I think that's an extremely that's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, guys like Don Layman have done calculations on study and said if everybody went plant-based, we could provide sufficient calories, but we would have to feed people even more calories than we do now to avoid critical nutrient deficiencies and things like lysine, zinc, and some of these other things. So people would be nutrient deficient. They'd be eating more calories. They'd be fatter than they are now. We wouldn't be saving the planet. Clearly, we wouldn't. So that's just not a solution.
Yeah, I like to remind people that, just how amazing animal agriculture is, and the fact that, they take these soybeans and they extract the oil, which they then feed to Americans, and This is something that's going to, and then it's the soy cakes and the byproducts that they end up feeding to these cows, which, and I'm not a fan, I don't endorse the factory farming system, but how amazing is it that cows are able to basically upcycle this garbage and turn it into such powerful nutrition?
Yeah, and just to be clarified, cows don't eat much soy. They don't handle soy very well. It's usually pigs and chickens to get the soy products. And most of the soy, like in Brazil, where they're always talking about the rainforest, most of that soy, obviously, is all 100% converted into human consumable oil, either via biofuels or in our soybean oil and all of our processed food. And then the soy meal that's left over will go mostly to China to feed the Chinese pigs. But it's interesting. When we look at upcycling cows, and most people don't understand that, because cows eat grass all day. All cows pretty much eat grass for most of their life, and then a small, in the United States, a large percentage, about 95% of them, go onto a feedlot where they spend about 3 months eating not just grain. They still eat the forage, they still eat the hay, they still eat the, and then they slowly add in a little bit of grain in there. And so about 10% of their diet ends up being grain. This is how they finish these animals. And
even in the factory farming system,
that's how the CAFOs and the grain finishing system works. It's not that they sit in a cage and are shoved corn. They still eat. Most of their diet is 50% corn at the very finishing phases for the last few weeks. So if you go to these places and ask them, it's a lot different than Cowspiracy and these other documentaries will tell you that. Sure. I've actually been there and visited with the people, so it's kind of you have a little bit more grounds to talk on when you've actually been there rather than getting your information from a documentary, which is obviously biased. Right?
Of course.
So this is another thing I think it's how you frame the argument. We say, well, if we use a greenhouse gas argument, which is something that people like to, this is a climate change emergency, right? We've got to cut down. We can't allow our atmosphere to go. Or our temperature to heat up by 2 degrees Celsius, or the world's going to explode, right? We're all going to die. When we look at greenhouse gases in the United States, for instance, we can look at the EPA data. So the healthcare sector produces 10% of our greenhouse gases. Cows produce 2% of our greenhouse gases. And so when you take people that are sick, so what's not sustainable is sick people. Sick people are the biggest environmental, when it comes to food, nutrition, and health, sick people are the biggest environmental impact when it comes to greenhouse gases. So if you take people, like they go on a carnivore diet and they're no longer sick and they're no longer using all their medications and going to the doctor visits, guess what? They've just become more environmentally sustainable. Now they've contributed to the 2% of what the cows are putting out, but they've stopped contributing to the 10%. So it's just kind of how you frame things, because when we make these huge policy changes, there's obviously knock-on effects, there's unintended consequences. And so let's say we say stop eating meat, start eating Impossible Burgers. I would argue that's complete garbage, and people will say, people like Neil Bernard say, no, it's completely fine, or Walter Willett might say that. I think clearly this industrialized processed slop is making people sick. Now, that's debatable, but that's what I think is occurring. Now, the problem is so many people, most of their diet is industrialized, processed garbage. So you add a little bit more to it, and it's like, does it make that much difference? Probably no one will notice. Right? And so the guys in the background, and this is the thing, we've got all these cries about the environment. Let's save the environment. Let's do this. Let's save the animals. And how did industry respond? What was the big push? Did they plant more blueberries? Did they were we getting more lettuce? Were we getting more kale and quinoa? No, we're getting, the fake stuff, the Impossible Burger, the slop. And the reason for that is, they're projecting that this alternate protein industry is going to be $140 billion a year, industry. And so these guys are like, rubbing their hands thinking, look at all the profit we're going to make. And so anytime I see plant-based, I think cheap and profitable. That's all that means, in my view, because, we've been eating meat for 3 million years as a human species. What other animal on the planet that has been eating meat its entire existence gets chronic disease? None. So why is it humans who have been eating meat their entire existence suddenly now are getting disease from meat when we've been doing it for 3 and we didn't have these problems? And I know that the people will say, well, they only live 30 years. Well, that's not actually correct. There's plenty of fossil remains where they think these people live much longer, 60, 70, 80 years old. It's just the infant mortality rates were so high. If a 30-year babies die at birth, your population average is going to be really low, and that's clearly what's happening. And so, in fact, when we adopted agriculture, we got smaller. We lost brain size by about 200 cc's. Our skeleton got weaker. Our teeth started to fall apart. We just got worse as a species when we took meat out of the diet and converted over to, a grain-based diet.
Yeah, it's just the nature of the food system today. It's so complex, and there's there's blood on pretty much everybody's hands, no matter what you choose to eat. So I couldn't agree more with you that to eat foods that are going to put you in the healthiest body composition, to be in the most, to be in the best metabolic health. I think those are the choices that you need to make. So where do you one of the arguments that I've heard when it comes to eating predominantly muscle meat, the question that I was going to ask you, I know it's going to come back to me. It was a good question, but what I did want to ask you was, people will say that if you're eating too much muscle meat, you're consuming too much methionine, for example, which is an amino acid found concentrated predominantly in muscle meat. But then, if we're not eating collagenous tissue, we're losing out on glycine, which you need to sort of balance out methionine, or you might have an impingement on your lifespan, for example. What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, any predictions on lifespan I think are garbage. We can't do that. But when it comes to methionine glycine ratios, and I've talked to Paul about this, and I say, look, I'd say, what is your argument, clinically? And he said, well, there may be a collagen problem. And I'm like, well, no one's having that clinically. But when we look at that, we have all these compensatory mechanisms that occur. And so there's an interesting study, I think it's from like 1970. It was done on Africans, and I think it might have been from folks in either Uganda or Kenya. And they basically looked at glycine absorption rates through the small intestine, where it's absorbed in the absence of glucose, in the absence of galactose. This is one of the sugars that makes up lactose. And they saw that in that situation, their glycine absorption went up, I think, 200 to 400%. So we're seeing that, if you're saying I'm getting too much methionine from eating meat, and the study that Paul's referencing is a rat study, right? And so what we're seeing is we have compensatory mechanisms when we're not eating sugar, that now our glycine ratios go up. So I think we just compensate for this. And we see this the same thing with vitamin D, with calcium. One of the thoughts was that you eat too much protein, and we see that we excrete more calcium in our urine. We get hypocalciuria, right? And so people assume it comes from our bone. But guess what? It's not what happens. We discovered that when we eat a higher protein diet, we absorb more calcium through our gut. So the more absorption, the more we get through our gut, the more we excrete in our urine. So again, there's all these compensatory mechanisms. You can look at, with studies from the 1920s, 30s, when they look at metabolism, and they show that, there were Inuit that had low vitamin D levels, which would make sense because they live in the cold where it's dark all the time, right? Half the year is completely dark. And they looked at which ones got actual disease, which ones actually got vitamin D deficiency disease, like rickets. And there were two populations. One population was eating their native diet of, seal and, reindeer or whatever they're eating, no rickets, even though they had low vitamin D levels. There's another population has low vitamin D levels. They're eating flour, sugar, canned goods. Guess what happened to them? Same vitamin D level, but now they get rickets. So it's not even as simple as what's in your blood. It's like, how much do you actually need? And so it becomes very fascinating.
So wait, did that study, correct me if I'm wrong, the study that Paul referenced that you brought up, if we're consuming more sugar, essentially, it's going to reduce our capacity to absorb glycine.
That would be based on the study on Africans. Yeah, that would be the assumption, because if you have if you have glucose mixed in with the methionine and the glycine doesn't absorb as well.
Yeah. What about vitamin C? Because that seems to be a hot topic amongst carnivores. Are you getting you're probably getting enough vitamin C to not develop scurvy, but is it optimal? Like, what are your thoughts on vitamin C?
Well, I mean, clearly no one's getting scurvy. I mean, or at least anyone. The only cases I've ever heard of scurvy are people living on Spam and beef jerky, which no one's recommending. You need to have fresh meat. It doesn't mean you have to eat meat right off the animal as it's warm still. I mean, it's just meat that hasn't been preserved or dried. So that clearly no one's getting scurvy. Now the question is, how much is optimal? How much is enough? I know guys like Chris Masterdown, it's you need 150 milligrams a day, and Paul's no, it's 60. And, I don't know that we can say for sure. I clearly don't. I mean, again, it's this is where we get into almost astrology. It's we're going to predict the future. Are you going to be optimal 20 years from now? I don't know that anybody knows. I know we have compensatory mechanisms. When we don't take in vitamin C, there's a host of things that, occur. We some people argue you're getting more carnitine through meat. Some people will say that, vitamin C is an antioxidant, and therefore we have upregulation on a low-carb diet. Glutathione, uric acid, some of these other things that can also serve as antioxidants. And so how much is enough? I don't think anybody can accurately say. Clearly, people that have been doing this 15, 10, 20 years still seem to be thriving and don't seem to be having any of these supposed, whatever the speculation is they're going to get with vitamin C suboptimal levels. I can't guarantee that. No one can guarantee that. It's just, kind of. And the thing is, this isn't a dogma. This isn't a religion. If you need some vitamin C, go whatever, take a vitamin C pill or whatever. If that truly becomes an issue, I mean, it's solvable. It's not, oh my God, I'm not going to eat vitamin C because I want to save the kiwi fruit or save the avocados. It's kind of you can do that if you needed to.
You brought up something very interesting on a podcast that you were on that I was listening to the other day that I thought was just a really great way to frame why meat is so just so great from a nutritional standpoint. And it was, I mean, I know why meat is important, but you framed it in a way that I thought was just really compelling, that the first organisms were essentially meat eaters or carnivores. Sure. And so, I mean, yeah, I would love to hear you kind of go through that.
Yeah, I mean, it's from just an efficiency standpoint. And so as animals started to develop around 800 million years ago, at least, for those that believe the evolutionary theories, 800 million years ago, multicellular animals started to emerge. And what did they eat? They ate single-celled organisms because it was just I'm made of something and I need more of it. So I'll eat that. And that was a strategy. And that's been a strategy for about 90% of all animals that have ever existed on the earth. Now, some of them, as different environments, kind of came into place. Like when the grasslands developed 100 million years ago, we started to find animals that could adapt to eating other products, and they had to develop more complex digestive systems like ruminants and cows, or other animals that have hindgut fermentation like horses, and then some of the primates. As that came in, that became a specialized skill, but it was less efficient. It's just dealing with an inferior product and being able to extract nutrition from that. As humans develop, we kind of went back to the more efficient strategy. But it makes sense. I've operated on thousands of people. When you cut a human open, they're made out of red meat. I mean, that's just we're red meat animals. And like I said, if we're building, if you got them, we're seeing this, in the crazy, we've got this game changers, and these athletes are trying it. We got guys like Cam Newton, he hurts himself, can't heal. Kyrie Irving's just out for the season because he can't heal his shoulder. And I know people say, you're just cherry picking, athletes get hurt all the time. But I mean, it was kind of interesting. I interviewed a gal. Her name's Kai Furneaux. She was on Naked and Afraid. She was like a Hollywood stunt woman, and she was a vegetarian. Went on the show, lost a bunch of weight. Had to succumb, had to eat animals to survive. And she said it took 2 years to recover from that. She lost 20 pounds, 2 years as a vegetarian to recover. She went back on again as a carnivore. She's now on the carnivore diet. She said she did the same thing, lost some weight. I mean, within 2 days, she was back to the gym working out. She started eating it. So it was like the recovery time was nothing, and we see this over and over again. So you think about we're building animal tissue, we're building animal cells, and there's a relationship, how much leucine, how much lysine, how much valine, how much phenylalanine, all these amino acids that we have that are in the appropriate ratios, in the appropriate amounts, and bioavailable. In fact, there was a recent study that just came out looking at the digestibility and the bioavailability of essential amino acids. And what they did was they took plant protein and animal protein. It was whey protein versus these plant protein blends, and they equalized them. They said these plant proteins have the exact amount of amino acids, the exact amount of leucine, which is important for muscle protein synthesis. And they fed them to these guys, and guess what? When they got the animal protein, their amino acids in the blood spiked nice and high. The plant protein, even though it was equivalent, the exact same amino acids, was 30 to 40% less.
Wow.
So that clearly shows there's a huge difference in there. And so it just makes sense. You're building something, and that's on a blend. That's on an isolate that's been designed. In nature, you've got to get rice and beans. And you got to imagine, you got to make everything work. And it's kind of like, you go back and, you can imagine if you're a caveman and you're like, okay, I got to go get rice, which grows 700 miles away, and beans that grow 500 miles. You couldn't make that work. I mean, the only ubiquitous source of these essential amino acids that was in every location throughout the world at all times in all seasons is an animal. I mean, you can't just make that. I mean, somebody tells me that plants are essential. I'm like, well, name the plant that grows in every situation throughout the world, in every altitude, every temperature range, and then I'll believe you. Because it doesn't. You can't find them. I mean, maybe somebody can name one. Maybe it's grass. I don't know.
No, but it's true that the nutrients that we get in animal products are bioidentical to what we crave in terms of our biology in our own bodies. I mean, even vitamin D, to carry us over through the winter, the vitamin D found in egg yolks in oily fish is going to be the same kind of vitamin D that our skin produces.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's true. I mean, it's, somebody would say, well, it's kind of a backhanded way for an advocacy for cannibalism, which I obviously, it's socially incorrect to do that. I don't advocate for that. But I mean, seriously, the more similar it is to what you're made of, and that's why people gravitate. I mean, people that do this carnivore diet, they start out fish, chicken, pork. They all end up going, man, I just want red meat. I just want steak, because it's really the most similar to what we can get outside of eating other humans, again, which is not a good idea. But that's what we're made of. That's what we really need. I think it has what we need. I mean, animal cells, basically, what are the requirements for an animal cell? It doesn't matter if it's an eyeball cell or a liver cell or a bone cell. The nutritional requirements are basically the same, and they have those ingredients. Not the concentrations might be a little different, but if you eat enough animal cells, and I know this is very simplistic, but if you eat enough animal cells, you're going to get what you need, right? You're going to get what you need. And the question is, how much is enough animal cells? Well, guess what? We have this really neat feedback system called an appetite. So you eat enough, whether it's liver, which may fill you up because you get the nutrition quicker, or it's steak. You might need to eat a little more steak. And so I think that's a different there. But I think, there's no other animal that straps a Fitbit and walks around with an app to figure out how to eat, right? And so a human should have that capacity. And I think just eating meat and enough of it really does that. It hacks your appetite. It's really hard to get fat eating meat. I mean, if you take a normal, healthy, normal weight human being and say, just go eat as much meat as you want, even if they stuff themselves and they just challenge, they may gain 5-10 pounds, but they're not going to get morbidly obese like people that are eating cheesecakes and Doritos and Twinkies and ice cream. I mean, it just doesn't happen. So I think it's a natural food for us. And again, if you can tolerate some other things, I don't care what you believe that we ate 50,000 years ago. Clearly, it wasn't Twinkies. Clearly, it wasn't Doritos. Now, had those things been available back then, I sure as hell think we would have eaten them. I mean, we would have because they taste good and they're a lot of energy. And that's a strategy. You think about when you were going back, no one had a dietitian telling them, hey, you need to hit your RDA of this and look at the polyphenols and look at the leafy greens. All they cared about was, I'm hungry, I need energy. I'm going to get my protein, eat animals. Hey, there's some berries. Hey, there's some honey. I got energy. That's what I'm going to go for. Am I going to eat leaves? They don't taste very good. There's no calories there. Why would I want to eat leaves? I think medicinally, and we can talk about, the psilocybins, the CBD, the THC, the whatever, the microdosing LSD, all this stuff that people are doing right now. I think it does have a medicinal effect. And again, we talked about this earlier. Is it a net positive? Is it a net negative? Is there tolerance that developed? You need to keep getting progressively more and more like you do with caffeine. What happens? You start 1 cup of coffee. Woo. Now 3 years later, I'm drinking 6 cups a day. Is that the situation?
That's bad.
I think, so I think you just have to put it in perspective. And like I said, I always encourage people to try. I mean, anytime somebody consults with me, I'm saying, hey, we need to go strict carnivore for a while, 3 months, 6 months in. I think there's another topic about food addiction. And I think that's a lot of people struggle with that because they can't. And, I've been there. I mean, you walk by the plate of cookies, man, you're like, I don't need it. I don't need it. You walk by 3 or 4 times, and all of a sudden I'll just have one. And then you just sit down and F it. I'm going to eat the whole damn, thing. Or you go 3, I'm a big guy, three pints of Ben and Jerry's later. And you're like, oh, yeah, I feel good. I'm bloated.
3.
Man, I used to eat 10,000 calories a day. Man, I was 290, 300 pounds.
Damn.
So I could do that. And so now it's like I've got this magic ability to not do that. And I think that's really almost like a superpower these days because it's everywhere. I mean, it's ubiquitous. You can't go anywhere without being bombarded with highly palatable food that's everywhere, that's cheap, and we're marketed to. We're like, hey, man, eat this. It's just good. You deserve it, right? You deserve that, that Snickers bar or whatever. It's so satisfying. And it's hard to escape from that. And everybody's doing it. Your friends are doing, hey, what the hell? Go ahead and do it. It's kind of like peer pressure. But once you get sort of the physiology lined up, and this is what happens when you eat this really highly nutrient-dense food, steak and eggs, liver if you want it, you get so satisfied. You're like, I don't really need that. And then you go 3 months into this, and you're like, hey, man, I've conquered this. And now if you want to have it, I can pick and choose, but I don't have that pressure. I don't have that internal constant gnawing at the back of my mind. Man, I'm just going to go to that refrigerator. I know there's something in there. I'm going to sneak down there, You get rid of that stuff, it goes away, and literally it's like having a superpower because you're like, man, I can eat when I want and I have control over it. And it's really, people say it's so restrictive, but it's really very freeing in that regard. And then I tell people, look, get to that point. That's step one. Conquer your cravings, conquer your food addiction, and then you can pick and choose and, kind of adjust and do all those types of things.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say that's almost the one thing that all of us seem to be able to agree on is that those ultra-processed foods really are poisonous. And then I thought to myself, well, there's probably like those if it fits your macros lunatics that are like, those are fine too if you just, are counting your calories.
Well, I mean, yeah, and I've debated Lane Norton, before I've had it, and I worked out with Lane, and, I think he's generally trying to do a good thing. But
same.
I think that, clearly food quality, I think, matters. There's the Twinkie diet guy, right? You can go and eat 1,600 calories of Twinkies and lose weight. Well, who cares? I mean, what did your body composition do? What happened to your inflammatory marks? Can you do that for 10 years? What happens if you do that for 10 years? I think negative things are going to happen, quite honestly, and I don't think you're going to stick to that. I mean, I think, we have this weird world where fitness competitors and Instagram models and everybody's showing off their six-pack, and it's like, how did you get there? There's a lot of drug uses in that, but I mean, it's just like they're just miserable when they're in that condition, and it's like, I've got to restrict so much, and most people just want to be able to eat and not worry about it. And that's, literally, I sit there and, I'm not, like I said, I'm not a fitness model, but I'm relatively lean. I'm 53. I've got,
you look great.
I'm, in reasonable shape, and I don't worry about it. I just eat. I mean, when I go home, I've got a 2.5 pound friggin' big old, prime ribeye waiting for me when I get home, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to enjoy it, but I'm not counting calories. I'm not counting macros. I mean, if I want to get really lean, I can eat a little leaner food for a while, but do I want to? I don't really care that much.
Yeah, there's no doubt that your diet, with the diet you're on, is probably the most satiating diet you're going to find, right? Meat is more protein is the most satiating macronutrient. Yeah, I'll be the first to admit that when I crack open a bag of one of these like healthier junk foods, I can't stop. Like it's impossible for me to stop. Are there any foods that you, like white rice or like, an occasional baked potato? I mean, is there ever a time where you feel like this isn't going to hurt me? Like, why not?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for me, I've done the targeted keto, I've done the cyclic keto stuff, and I found it from an athlete, and I'm really concerned about athletic performance for me personally, but I didn't find like a significant enough of a benefit for me, and again, I'm 53, that it made sense for me to do that on a regular basis.
Do you ever miss the taste?
Not so much. I mean, certainly here's what I'd say. I mean, I'm not going to cheat on my diet to eat broccoli. I mean, F that. I don't like it. I mean, it's not going to eat anyway, right? I never liked vegetables growing up. I remember my dad, who's on a carnivore diet now, he used to make this meatloaf with onions, and I hated onions. And he put them in there, and I'd sit there, and I'm like, Dad, why did you put onions in there? You know, I don't like, he goes, you can't even taste them. I said, well, if you can't taste them, why'd you put them in there? And he's like, well, shut up and just eat them, right? So, but then I talked to him like years later when he's carnivore. I did, dude, why'd you make me all those vegetables? I don't know. I just felt like you had to, but he never liked them either. So it's kind of funny. But, you know, if I felt okay. And I was like, cool, that's fine. But I don't really like sit there and like, oh, plan on it and crave this stuff anymore. So, you know, once in a while, my girlfriend will like, she does like 95% carnivore. She used to be a vegetarian. She'll still eat some fruit and a little bit of vegetables here and there, a little avocado, a little bit of vegetables here and there, a little avocado. I don't really get excited about that anymore. You know, it's weird. I mean, I know it seems crazy. If you'd asked me 5 years ago, like, oh, you only want to eat steak and eggs, it just goes away. I mean, you just don't have that craving and desire. Now, it's not to say, and people ask me, are you going to do this the rest of life? I'm like, I don't know. I'm not going to pin myself down to that. I mean, recently I tried to bring in some fruit. And, you know, I like fruit. It tastes good. I had a bunch of raspberries. And I started getting a little bit of knee pain. I know it sounds totally crazy, but I was like, you know, it's just this there. And I mean, I know when I was on Rogan, I said, look, I ate a bunch of food, and one of them was an apple. He's like, what? An apple made you have back pain? And then it's kind of funny. 2 years later, he's like, I went on the carnivore diet and I ate some other food and I got back pain. And I was like, you know, it's the same thing. Now, I don't know if it was the apple. I don't know if it was, you know, whatever else I was eating because I ate a bunch of foods. But it's just, you know, I'll experiment. But to your point, because I work with a lot of athletes now, a lot of high-level athletes are wanting to try this because it does seem to have a performance advantage. From when we talk about athletics, recovery is phenomenal. You know, your protein is good. I mean, your strength tends to go good. Your body composition improves. Your strength to weight ratio goes good. And then I tell them, you know, let's see how you do with performance. And if you're doing like really high-intense glycolytic stuff, then you may say, what carbohydrate can help me? Because clearly it does have a performance advantage, or it can. You can make up a lot of that for gluconeogenesis, and you can adjust your training to where you don't need those things. And I think the question becomes, you know, from an athletic performance over the long haul, like say you're an Olympic athlete and you're training for 4 years for the Olympics. The more days you can train, the more days you're not sick, injured, tired, the better your performance is going to be long term. So if you're eating a diet that's inflammatory, and I think a lot of athletic diets are, I think meat tends to be not very inflammatory. So the more you can train with meat, you know, you can get that. And then if you just need a little bit of carb here and there and be very judicious about your use, and you find a minimum effective dose, that works pretty well for those guys. And so it's maybe as simple as just like a dextrose tablet. I mean, again, we're talking about just athletic performance. Because the only concern really is glucose. In my view, the greatest benefit for plant food is just the glucose. It's just the energy. It's you know, it's not the it's not the polyphenols and the tannins and all the things that we think are great. I think that's plus or minus, but I think from a performance standpoint, it's clearly glucose is a big winner here. Glucose is not the enemy. I mean, it can be for a diabetic perhaps, but we make glucose. I mean, we critically need glucose. And if we don't get it, we don't feed ourselves, our body will make sure we have it through gluconeogenesis. It's one of the reasons people have such good blood sugar control in a carnivore diet, because we make just what we need. We just make exactly what we need, and it's very flat and stable. Every time I've seen somebody strap on a CGM on a carnivore diet, I mean, it's like a pond, man. There's not even a wave. I mean, it's so stable. And the endocrinologists are super happy. The type 1 diabetics are super happy. But back to the athletes, I'd say find something that doesn't irritate your gut, because, you know, if you're on a carnivore diet, you know, you're getting most of your nutrition from meat, say 70% meat, eggs, whatever, 30% are carbs, or it might be 80 or 90% perhaps, depending on your sport. You find those carbs that are going to work, and it could be white rice, it could be a sweet potato. I know a lot of people think that's popular. Sweet potatoes have a lot of oxalates, which can be a problem for some people. I mean, I generally say, you know, for me, I'd say start with something like this: get a dextrose tablet or pure glucose, or you know, maybe honey or maple syrup. I mean, this is pure sugar, right? But that's really what we're wanting. That's the effect we're wanting as an athlete. We don't care about all the other stuff.
And you take it like before the workout or like during the workout?
Yeah, I mean, this would be either pre or intra workout. I mean, I don't think there's any point in recovery. I mean, you know, the data on that, I've talked to some of the top protein researchers in the world. I mean, really, to build muscle, you need adequate amino acids. You need 2.5 grams of leucine, typically 2 to 3 grams. You need a calorie surplus typically. I know there's guys who are talking about putting on muscle in a deficit, and that's drugs and crazy stuff that just most people can't do that. And then, you got to recover, and you got to do the right training, right? So this is the ingredient. The carbohydrates don't really build muscle. Now you can have performance through glucose and glycogen. Those would be the major advantages there. But then again, you might be able to get it from gluconeogenesis depending on how many times a day you work out. If you're just working out once a day, you probably don't need the carbs for most workout. But if you're doing CrossFit and you're doing 3 workouts a day, or you're doing prolonged activity, you might need that little top off.
Yeah. Well, we're just about out of time, Shawn.
Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.
You can actually trace lectins climbing the vagus nerve to the brain in animal models of leaky gut.